Hi, I'm Chuck Fletcher.
Hi, my name is Alain Vigneault, coach of the Flyers.
Hey, I'm Travis Konechny.
Hey, this is Jeremy Roenick.
Hi, this is Travis Sanheim.
Hi, I'm Paul Holmgren.
Hey, I'm Scott Lawton.
Hi, I'm Joel Farabee.
Hi, this is Bob Clark.
And you're listening to
Snow the Goalie.
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 Oh, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast, the People's Podcast, Players Podcast, Prognosticators Podcast, Pedialyte Podcast, Pampers Podcast, the only Flyers podcast. And, well, a podcast that it's down to two of us right now. No Ant Philly. He's supposed to be here at some point today, but I don't know. Was he fired? Was he let go like Alain Vigneault? We'll find out here in a little bit. But first, I want to introduce to all of you the lovely Chris Terrian. Bundy, find him on Twitter at CTerrian6. How you doing, fella?
I'm doing good, buddy. How are you doing? It's been a very quiet week, right?
Very quiet. Nothing has happened in Flyers land. Well, nothing of the winning varieties happened, but of course, we have to right off the top lead. And I know that I didn't change the intro, and I'm sure there are people who are going to make fun of the fact that I still have, hi, this is Alain Vigneault, coach of the Flyers. You're listening to Snow the Goalie. Like, great. I felt like we owe him, we owe him one more sign off before we remove him from the intro. But a week after Flyers GM Chuck Fletcher meets with the media and gives a vote of confidence to the coaching staff, the Flyers fire Alain Vigneault and Michel Therrien, the guy who ran the power play, who once again the GM defended, saying that it was more of a personnel issue than a coaching issue less than a week before. Bundy, are you surprised that the Flyers moved on from Alain Vigneault and Michel Therrien in the way they did, and especially as quickly as they did after Fletcher met with the media?
You know, there's a whole bunch of things that I think go into a coach firing, Russ. And, I'm sure it crept into Chuck's mind even earlier than when the actual firing happened. But he did give him a vote of confidence. Both him and Alain Vigneault, I thought both challenged the players. If you want to use the word challenge, I think AV kind of really took it to task. Like, guys can't make plays or not making plays. Guys that we've relied on before, they're not getting it done type of, that type of language that you hear after a loss. But I guess that game Sunday night, there's always a few games in the year for any team where you look at a game and you're like, man, that was just a rough one. But the circumstances couldn't have been as dire as they were for the team, sitting with 3 days off, waiting for the two-time Stanley Cup champion to come into your building that played the night before, and you get thumped 7-1. I mean, and then after the firing, it goes back to the next night where they got another touchdown and an extra point kicked on them in back-to-back home games. 14 goals against in 2 home games against a Colorado team that's been struggling mightily. Now I know there's McKinnon's back in the lineup and Makar was on another planet the other night, but at the same time, again, if your level of compete is high, if you've got yourself really integrated in a mindset that you want to go out and win hockey games and really battle, you're going to be in those games. And they weren't. And so again, the easy thing then after was Chuck say, I didn't like what I saw in a 7-1 drubbing. So I decided that night to fire the coach, whether it was him or, a myriad of voices that were echoing through that night, that he had to make a change. But clearly, by the way it went down, he was not prepared for a coaching change. He brought in, he just relegated the job to Mike Yeo, which tells me that he had absolutely contacted nobody in the prior days looking into coaches. So this was clearly either he did it, really felt that bad that it's time we need to make a change, which after that, I mean, what else are you going to do? It goes back to the adage, Russ, you can't fire 20 players. So what can you do? You can fire the 2 coaches and pay them an awful lot of money to go away. I mean, as much money as you could possibly find and have to pay an outgoing coach. The Flyers just did that.
And so I look at the timeline of things, and I've been long concerned about what this team looks like in terms of if and when a coaching change happens, who gets brought in, Do they make an immediate hire? Have they already put feelers out to a number of different potential candidates? And then I think about the timing, and I go back to something that Ant wrote, I think it was on Tuesday, and he kind of pulled back a layer on the timeline here. And he said, according to a team source, Flyers chairman Dave Scott told Fletcher the time was Monday morning after a 7-1 debacle against Tampa on home ice Sunday. Now, I want to kind of approach this from a few different ways, right? I don't like meddling owners. I never have. I think meddling owners is where you really start to get into a position where you're not trusting the people that you've hired to run the operation. There have been rumors as of late that Jeffrey Lurie has gotten more involved on the Eagles side of things. And he's got his ultimate yes man, Howie Roseman, there doing a terrible job drafting. Fine. You have Jerry Jones in the NFL who consistently meddles and is his team's GM.
He's the GM,
yeah,
Russ.
Yeah.
So that's the ultimate meddling.
Yeah. And then I look at this and I know that for a long time, the thought was that Ed Snyder really had input. Ed Snyder could give an edict, like go out and get this player, get the best player available at this position. That's how you end up with Ilya Brizgalov. But when you hire a lifer like Chuck Fletcher to be the GM, who I said at the time was not an imaginative hire. It wasn't a creative hire. It was kind of a recycled hire. And when you hire a coach like Alain Vigneault, who has a long track record, has built up clout as a coach in this league, you don't have a lot of flexibility. Like if it doesn't work, I don't know where you go next. You tried with Hextall and Hackstall to go a little bit out of the box, and then you reined it back in. I don't understand conceptually how, if you're Dave Scott, you say, all right, this drubbing was one too many. Now we have to get rid of this coach, but you kept the GM. Like, do you see logic in why you would keep one over the other instead of just either holding off and firing both at the end of the year? Like, why should people believe that Chuck Fletcher deserves the chance to hire another coach? Like, let's start there.
First of all, I don't know the relationship Chuck has with Dave. It's obviously a special one. I mean, seriously, he's been here a few years. You know, when Hextall was relieved, it kind of, you know, Dave was here after Luco, so he had a little bit of time, but not a lot. So when you break it down, probably that relationship, you know, he probably doesn't really know anything else except for the guys like were here before, like Paul Holmgren and Bob Clark, who, you know, many people wonder what role they have in the organization, if they still have a voice at all. I know Clark, he's in there. He's been a mentor for many years to Chuck Fletcher, but you know, why there wasn't an overhaul, I don't know. I mean, but again, you know, when you make these decisions, you know, here's another issue. When you do these kind of things, you know, you have to go to the president of the hockey club, right? To if you're the owner, to go to the president and say, listen, we're going to make a wholesale change. And then that trickles down to the, you know, for that president to say, okay, yeah, you know what, you're right. Or we discuss it. And then you make your pre-phone calls to other candidates. It sometimes takes a few days, you know, like get your ducks in a row, including your coaches. But, you know, in terms of where this was at, this was just a removal of a coach. There was no thought out process about bringing in any kind of new coach. It clearly was never discussed, or Mike Yeo wouldn't have been sitting on the bench Monday night, you know, as the new Flyer. By the way, that doesn't change anything. You know, you fired the two coaches, but he was still one of the three guys. So for me, you know, we had a bizarre situation. I'm just going back 1 year playing. We had Wayne Cashman as our head coach. I loved Wayne Cashman. That guy was as old school as they came. I mean, it was, you know, get to the front of the net, clear the front of the net. If you're a forward, get to the front, you know. He was just like an old legend, and every guy loved him, but he wasn't a head coach at the time, right? And everybody kind of knew that. So a decision was made, and I think the players had heard about it. This is, I think, what, 97, 98, that season. And so, you know, Clark, he'd made some moves, and during the game, Roger Nielsen had came into town, and Wayne Cashman wasn't even aware of what had happened. He'd been fired essentially during coaching a Sunday night game. Roger came over, and then Cash went back to become assistant coach, which he was great at. Like, he loved doing that, working with guys. He just wasn't a head coach. But these things, as I said, they take time. There's a lot of planning involved. And I just don't think that, I really do think that either Chuck got marching orders, get rid of him, or he really did indeed, say to himself, we can't go another game like this. But I'm actually in agreement that I think that as a GM, I would have just let him get through that Monday night game too, instead of putting a new coach behind the bench for that debacle. I just would have let it ride out, and then taken the next day or so, or started making my calls Monday. Yeah. Start investigating what kind of a budget do I have to work with? What am I allowed to hire? The problem is they just fired $12.5 million. That doesn't account for the alumni. That doesn't go in the alumni group, Kitty, that they fired the alumni. That we're not nowhere near that kind of payoff for us. But you know what? That's a lot of money. So I also think there's a fiscal business part of this where somebody said you can't go get another $3 or $5 million coach because we're not paying him that. So I think whoever the Flyers coach is going to be for the next 2.5 years, it's going to be a low budget coach because of the money that they're paying AV. I'm just being serious. I'm telling you.
I know, because
they're canning $70,000 alumni and people that have been there for 54 years. I can assure you, money is of the premium right now, and they're trying to run it like a business.
Which is just absolutely wild, right? Like, if there's a team in this league that shouldn't have to pinch pennies, if there's a team in the league that you shouldn't have to worry is going to be willing to go out and spend the money on quality in terms of front office or coaching, it should be the one that's owned by Comcast. Like, who are we kidding? This isn't some small family run business. This isn't some small market company that just happened to put together an ownership bid and it's more or less like owned by the people. Like, it's not that. Like, what are we doing here? Like, if you're supposed to believe that Dave Scott and company genuinely care about the Flyers or genuinely care about upholding some kind of image as like one of the best franchises or one of the most meaningful franchises in the NHL, then what are we talking about? Like, you go out and you spend the money for the coach, right? So, like, I don't think John Tortorella's a fit here. I think that if players were disaffected by the way that Alain Vigneault treated them, I don't see any scenario in which Tortorella is successful here. I just don't. Like, he'll burn every bridge in town. And I don't think it's a bad thing, by the way. Like, if accountability is the thing that this group needs, then sure. But then Chuck Fletcher's got to be committed to really completing an overhaul. It can't just be tertiary moves and moves along the edges. This has to be like a fundamental change in who's the core leadership of this team. Yeah. And who are the guys that we're building around for the next 5 or 6 years? It can't just continue to be trading out small pieces here or there. Like, there has to be a meaningful change. And again, like, I don't know if Chuck Fletcher is the guy who should be overseeing that. Like, let's bring this back. This past offseason, we thought that there was a legitimate chance that Alain Vigneault didn't want to coach this team. We went through all of last season, pressing and pressing. Does he want to be back? Anthony pressed him on if he wants to be back. And he was very non-committal. So Vigneault and company go in with Fletcher and they devise this plan. They devise this list of, these are the kind of players we want. These are specific guys that we want, that we think that can execute the system and can bring us back to a short stretch that happened in the 1920 season that gave everybody hope. The coach and the GM worked together. The coach came up with the list. I'm sure the GM had some input. The GM acquired the players. It didn't work. And now the coach is gone and the GM's here. And so if those two collaborated on this idea together and one had to give approval, one had to go out and acquire the players, I don't know what we're doing here. Like, that to me is an issue because it represents a miscalculation from coaches evaluating what they thought would work and the GM who went out and acquired those players. Like, I don't see how there's any other way. And by the way, if the GM didn't think that it was a good idea, they could have fired the coach in the offseason, or they could have allowed the coach to resign in the offseason. So I'm having a fundamental issue trying to understand how any of this makes sense, like how you could blame Vigneault, and then there's no blame seemingly that falls at the feet of the guy who constructed the roster. Do you see it differently?
Yeah, no, and I agree. I mean, listen, we're at I'm just looking at it from, first of all, I'm not a guy who will ever make a suggestion saying, like, somebody wants to keep Chuck Fletcher, go ahead and keep him, right? Like, he's your property. You can do what you want with him. And it's clearly Dave Scott is the boss that he answers to. And and Dave obviously trusts what he has to say. You know, this is a team that's picked up now 3 players in the last since the beginning of the season off of waivers.
Mhm.
You know, that's 3 players that are actually playing. You know, you had Patrick Brown, Zach McEwen, and now Connaughton yesterday. Obey Kubel got picked up by Colorado. Actually played okay last night too. Took a pass from him. That would have been about typical if he came in here and buried a pair of goals the other night.
Yeah.
But listen, there's always accountability, and I think when I look at as a, you know, everyone wants to play GM. I'm not really looking at the moves Chuck made as being bad moves, or saying that they were, you know, regressive moves. Like Yandel's a plug-in guy. You know, at this point in his career, if you don't know what you're getting from him, well, then you shouldn't be doing the job. And let me kind of dissect, I think, what the issue was that Chuck's had. It's not bringing in the guys he brought in. For me, it's keeping the same guys that have been around time and time again, and that includes 28. That includes the captain. The captain again, guys, I just saw a tweet from Bill Meltzer earlier today. He's been the best player on the team again this year. And what did we say before the season started? If he's the best player on the Flyers team, this team is done. They're in more trouble than they could possibly imagine. He did every single thing humanly possible within his skill range right now the other night to try to help them win that second game. He played his ass off. But at this point, it's not good enough. They need to make serious core changes at the very top. And that's the only way that this franchise has a chance to go backwards for a bit, which would be understanding with the fan base. By the way, my Twitter poll the other day, it was a little less than I thought it would be. I thought there'd be more people willing to actually go for a full rebuild. It was 2/3 that said go for a rebuild. The other 1/3 exactly said retool and reload. They've been retooling and reloading for 7 or 8 years now, and I'm not sure retooling and reloadings work, because if the top core guys are not getting it done, and that's what's happening. That's what I see right there, and that's where Chuck had to make, for me, my estimation when he came in, he had to make 1 or 2 major changes to that core. I don't even know what the core is anymore. I mean, we have a leadership group, but, you know, again, when you've lost 9 in a row, every question is fair at this point. Hi, Anthony.
We'll let Ant jump in. Ant is here, ladies and gentlemen. You can follow him on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. How you doing? Out here on the road?
Joining you from the car.
It's okay. You're here.
Yes.
Man. You're here. I might have to do that.
Joining you from the car. Yeah, well, I think we did it with you once before, Bundy.
Yeah.
So, I heard what you just said. I mean, obviously I caught just the last part of it because I hopped in here the last, 2 minutes. And my thought process is, you can win with retooling, but you have to do it the right way. And what we've seen over the course of the last decade, whether it was Ron Hextall, well, goes back to Homer, I guess, at the end of his tenure. But what we saw with Hextall and now with Chuck Fletcher is every time they've tried to retool, or if they did that often, but when they tried to retool, it didn't work. They didn't do it the right way. And here we thought that this might have been, because of the way Chuck went all in this past summer, that this might have been the right way to do it. To make the wholesale changes. Yeah, it might take a little bit of time for the team to gel, but it'll eventually get there. And what you don't expect to happen is a 9-game losing streak at this point in the season that causes the coach to get fired and create turmoil. Because, I mean, really right now, there is a lot of turmoil. And the turmoil is because the coach got fired a little bit sooner than the GM wanted. He wasn't prepared to bring in another head coach. There was no practice time. They're middle of 5 games in 7 days. They don't have They really don't have assistant coaches. They're waiting to hear from some people to see if they'll accept the job. And it's just kind of, I think it's setting them back even further in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You have to do it the right way. And I'm of the group that's in the 33%, because I think it can be done the right way, but I would rather you go for it than say, you know what, we're going to suck for 4 or 5 years And then hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be okay at that point. Because we've seen in this town how that can go wrong. Like whether or not you believed that the Sixers process would have worked if they just would have let Sam Hinkie run the show for another 4 years. The fact of the matter is things went awry and things did not work. And here you have the Sixers in the same spot they were when this whole thing started, right? And so therefore you say, well, isn't it possible that the same thing can happen in hockey? I mean, how long have the Buffalo Sabres been rebuilding, right? I mean, it's the same thing can happen there. So to me, it's like you can do that. You're gonna lose part of your fan base if you do, and then maybe they'll come back if you get successful. But there's no guarantee that you're going to be successful. And Russ and I were talking about this last night on Let's Go to the Phones, which is another podcast that's run through the Crossing Broad Network, where we were guests. Is there any belief that this group will draft enough talent to come in and in the next 5 years be a good team? I don't know. So I'd almost rather you try and win with talent that exists in the league somewhere and you try to acquire it than to sit there and say, hey, we haven't drafted well for forever, so let's just keep doing it and hope we get it right eventually.
You know what? Here's an interesting one for you, Anthony, right? This is a guy, like I'm just thinking of trades and moves that teams have made over the years that were in similar spots to the Flyers that took somebody off their core and tried for the betterment of the team to do it. Look at Nazem Kadri the other night for Colorado, right? Why is he not a Toronto Maple Leaf? He was as effective a player as they had, and they decided to move him, whether that contract situation was arising for him, but they decided to get assets because they knew they had to pay other guys. So that's one example I use, and he's a very, very good hockey player. Like he does a lot of things for whatever team he's on. Drafting is a massive part of it. The Flyers, under whoever's done it, has done an awful job drafting. I mean, the Nolan Patrick play, unfortunately, didn't work out. It happens sometimes. You don't want it to happen with the number 2 pick. It did. There's been other guys as well. O'Brien, whether he comes on, he's out of here though, right? Like the kid that he went to Providence and he transferred to Boston University, Jay O'Brien, right?
And he's not doing well there either.
He's not either. So, there's been problems drafting with this organization. And especially if you have high picks, which the Flyers are certainly looking like they're going to have one, you can't make a mistake. But what's funny, guys, too? Look at the Rangers, and I go around teams just looking at draft picks of guys that have had really good picks. If you take a look at Kakko and Lafreniere, they have been good younger players, but they've not lit up the league yet. They've done it with abundance of guys like Zibanejad, Panarin, and Fox, who's been a revelation all of his own. So that's part of it's getting lucky, but the Rangers did take a step backwards. And
don't forget the goalie there, Bundy.
Oh no, right. Yeah. You know what, Anthony? You know me well enough. I think every goalie should stop every puck, so I never consider them anyway. But I'm kidding. But he's an outstanding young goalie. But they have guys like they built around it, and they're relying on their veterans. But they've, again, I think those draft picks will work out. But there has to be a fine balance between. I think I always, I talked to Hexy. I always feel like you used to have your roster. If you're going to have a team that's going to be competitive over time, I would say probably 65% of them have to come off a draft, and the other 35 come off of trades or free agency. I think that's a pretty fair number.
And therein lies the biggest concern that I have.
Yes.
with the lack of change at the top. So, and to catch you up, I asked the question of Bundy early in the show. If the thought here is that the GM and the coach collaborated on the acquisitions and the list and such this past offseason, and it didn't work, and you moved on from the super experienced head coach, and you knew that there was a chance that would happen this year, I openly posited the question out, what makes you stick with this GM long term? I mean, maybe he gets through this through the season, but I look at what Chuck Fletcher's done as a talent evaluator, as a GM. I look back to his time at Minnesota, and the results are not good. So if you make the determination that he's the guy to build this team, like if Dave Scott is married to the idea that Chuck Fletcher has to be the GM, I'm deeply concerned, because if this team, for whatever reason, doesn't want to go out and hire a high money coach, a big money coach to come in and try to turn things around, that's a problem. And if Chuck Fletcher is going to be the guy that has to build this team, I'm scared. Because if you look back, his 2010 draft with Minnesota was solid. He got Granlund, Larson, Zucker. The latter two were acquired in the second round. That was probably his best draft. That was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And then it just becomes dog shit from that point on. He found Broden in the first round in 2011. Matt Dumba is the only player of note that he drafted in the first round in 2012. The rest of the picks have played a combined 9 games in the NHL. You look at 2013, he didn't have a first round pick. Most of the picks were iffy at best. Curtis Gabriel played 49 games or whatever. He found Susi plays 108 games in the NHL. You look at 2014, again, it's a 1-player draft. It's his first round pick he hit. That was it.
Take a look at Cam Barker and Nick Leddy. Wasn't that one of the trades he made too, right?
Yeah. Well, he admits that was the worst trade he ever made.
It was asinine.
Yeah.
2015 draft.
So
the first 2 picks are okay. Well, no, I'm trying to make a point here. 2016, his first round pick is okay, and that's it. There is an issue here if you're going to go the route of a rebuild, which you guys have talked about. But if you're going to go with a rebuild, you need somebody who you think can find value, not just in the first round, but in later rounds as well. And Fletcher has not demonstrated an ability to do that so far as a GM in this league, which I find highly concerning. No matter which way you want to go, whether it's a retool or a rebuild, I'm not sure he's the guy that should be in charge of ushering in that next wave, that next move, that next deciding way that your franchise is going to go for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily disagree with you, Russ. I mean, most GMs get 2 coaches, right? Mm-hmm. So he had his first coach and it failed. So he's probably going to get 1 more, all right, before he's out. But I think it is fair to say, I mean, we talked about this before the summer, and I remember saying to you then, and I'll stick by it now, that the summer was Chuck's summer and that he had to produce during the summer. And we thought that he did a nice job at the time. Turns out it's really not working yet. Now, there's still time. I mean, you never know. We'll see what happens. But let's assume that they don't respond, that they don't get back into it, that they end up becoming a team that's got to trade off pieces at the deadline and go into yet another offseason of uncertainty. It's fair to question whether Chuck Fletcher's the right guy for that. Because he finally had the opportunity after, you say the first season, okay, was an evaluation season, and his second and third seasons were, interrupted greatly by COVID and a lot of things like that. Okay, fine. So now this is the 4th season with him, and he put his fingerprints all over the roster, and it didn't get any better. So maybe you could sit there and say, well, why does he deserve another chance? I think that's a fair question at that point. Certainly is in my mind to sit there and say that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and call for his head. I don't think it's at that point just yet, but I think it's certainly worth questioning whether he's the right guy or not. I think we're certainly in that phase of the situation right now.
I think it's also fair to question if that's the case, and I know you won't agree with this, but it is what it is. I don't know if you think that there's not the ability. I mean, one, if he's proven incapable of finding legitimate value outside of the first round as a draft evaluator, as a GM in this league, that in of itself is concerning, because this isn't a team that is 1 or 2 pieces away and needs to just have 1 or 2 guys coming down the pike to replace guys who are aging out. You don't have a farm system that's so ripe with talent that you can afford to only hit on a first round pick and then have the rest of it be kind of iffy or a toss up. If you know that on the draft side of things, he's not an elite evaluator, and then that, all right, he had the chance to build a roster this past offseason, and he's had chances over the last couple of years to make tweaks in season, and the results haven't been great. I don't know, why would you give him then the possibility to go out and hire yet another coach? If it's me, if I'm Dave Scott, I look at this and I say, I would rather roll with Mike Yeo the rest of the year. And I'd rather get an idea of what this team looks like, Can Yo turn around? I don't think he can, but can Yo turn this around? Can Fletcher make some moves to bring this team back into playoff contention? And if not, I consider cleaning house. Like, I don't know why you would let him go out and hire Tortorella or hire Montgomery or let him hire Tocchet. To me, you're just kind of kicking the can down the road. And I don't see a cohesive idea of, or like a cohesive vision of like what makes this team successful.
I think the best way to really measure a general manager is the roster moves that they make, in an offseason, whether it's through trades and free agency, and the contracts that they offer players, and see where those players are, relative to the money that they're making. I think that's where drafting, it's kind of hard. You start to say he's never really had a great draft, and maybe he hasn't had a great draft. But I think in the NHL, and Bundy will probably agree with me on this, you should hit your first rounder for sure. That's the one that you can't miss in the first. But second, third rounder, how many of them make it to the NHL? Second rounders are probably 40%, third rounders probably 30%, and then beyond that, it's like 10%. Right? I mean, it's like you're really not expecting to make great moves further down the draft. It's not like an NFL draft where you can replenish your roster in the second, third, fourth, fifth rounds. Like the NHL doesn't really work that way.
That's my concern, because he hasn't really hit even near that 40% clip in the second or third round. Like I said before, there are entire years where you get to the second, third, and beyond, and there are no games played at the NHL level. Like, that to me is a massive concern.
I don't know if it's massive, but I think you're going to find that in a lot of teams.
Well, I really do. One of the issues they do have, guys, is clearly their minors are just not. They don't have anything they can offer to the team right now. I said to Russ earlier, Anthony, if you're picking up Kevin Connaughton off of waivers, off from Florida at this time of the year, that you're clearly signaling to everybody you're desperate to get some form of defensive depth, right? So again, those are if there's no, because if they thought they had somebody that can come up here and do a better job than Sealer was doing, then they probably wouldn't have had to go get somebody, pick up another small contract off the waiver wire.
Yeah, well, I think that's a situation too, though, Bundy. When you look at what the Phantoms have been through this year, they have 10 guys out with injury. York was sidelined with COVID. The Phantoms were picking up free agents, like they were signing amateur contracts, but they didn't have enough players. So there is, I think there might be a reason for a Connaughton pickup there. Not that it's going to make a difference. You're Connaughton versus Sealer. Really. Is one really better than the other? I don't know.
I want to get back to
Bundy. They're both the same. They're just trying to pick up depth, but one guy's up here now. It's a tough situation, and there's been a lot of teams have had injuries too all year. COVID stuff still lingering around. But yeah, no, that's a problem. I understand both your sides, guys. Really, I do. When you look at it, you just, you can't have the off season and then the expectations coming in that you're going to really made those tweaks, and then the tweaks haven't worked. The one thing I'll give him credit for, like Ryan Ellis, we haven't seen a full Ryan Ellis. Do I think that he would have turned this whole ship around? I don't. They've had problems scoring. I just don't think that one guy was going to make a difference. And so they have their work cut out for them, because they're behind the 8 ball now. And now you got to start. It's not like you have to climb the 3 teams ahead of you. You got to climb the 3 teams ahead of you before you get up to those 3 teams. So, they almost have to go on a 10 or 12 game winning streak at some point again, like they've done in the past. And for any fans out there, I'll give you a little hope. They've done that crazy stuff before. But I tell you what, man, they may have run out of their 4-leaf clovers.
Well, and so
I don't know if you guys have talked about this yet. Well, I don't know if you've talked about this yet, but the concern for me is different than I think the concern for you, Russ. The concern for me is that there are players on this roster who were being counted on, who were not players that Chuck brought in, but players that he signed to a contract, or that were under contract already, that were expected to elevate their play in conjunction with the players that he brought in that have not contributed. Okay. And the 2 that we talked about yesterday were that are the most prominent are Couturier and Provorov.
Yeah.
Bundy, I know we've talked about Provorov really not being a one, and I think we're starting to see that that's the case, and that your assessment on that has been pretty accurate. But switching over to Couturier for a second, I mean, here's a guy that 2 years ago won the Selke Trophy, was one of the top centers in the NHL. Last year played hurt, still was a pretty good player, maybe not up to his level, but played hurt, and it took a slight step back. But with the way he's playing right now, he looks like a shell of himself. Like, and they just signed him to a long-term big money deal. Like, that to me is a bigger concern. Is this something that you think that Coots can get by? Is it something that's just, we talk about, your body kind of breaking down or being hockey tired, and just needs a break. Maybe the Olympic break will do him good and then he'll come back and be okay. Or is it something that you sit there and say, man, he's got a lot of miles on his body already he came into the league at 18, and even though he's only 29, he might have the body of a 35-year-old right now.
Yeah. You know what? It's very possible. And he's had some pretty significant injuries over the years, knees and some playoff battles and stuff. He's had a lot of, battles with Malkin going back earlier in his career. He hasn't been the same player, but he'd be the one guy for me that I would really think that, he could, if when the team rounds into whatever form, he's going to have to, first of all, be very much a driver in this scenario and not a passenger. I mean, it's time now for him to get behind the wheel of the bus. I mean, you got paid, you got a 7-year deal, whatever it was a long contract. So you know what? There's no more like in the shadow of G, or you're a younger guy than Kevin Hayes. You need to start taking onus of this team, and even probably start acting like a captain on the ice. I think, if Giroux moves on, the most logical guy will be Couturier. But I just think right now, guys, they just look mentally beat. They really do. Yeah. He looks like a beat down hockey player. Giroux doesn't. It's funny. He doesn't. He just goes out and plays. But there's a lot of guys that you could really tell this is really wearing on them. And I could see it in their face watching them on TV. I mean, I've been there, and it's almost like a stress within a stress of trying to win the game, trying to perform as optimally as possible for yourself, for your teammates. And when you're not getting the results, I'll tell you what is a really bad sinking feeling. And he's a guy that I know, I've known over the years, having done those, close broadcasts. He cares. Like, he cares a lot about things, and and I'm sure his play right now is of concern even to himself as it is to the fans. But Anthony, to what you just said, yeah, you start getting to 700 games or whatever it is, more than 500 certainly, and play the rich minutes that he's played, you're going to start getting beat up and banged up, and those little nicks and bruises will start adding up over time. So yes, that is a factor. He's a 29-year-old, but he probably has a lot more of a mid-30 body in him, just because of the amount of miles on him.
Which is yet another concern, because
that's the big concern.
Well, yeah, I mean, this comes back to, I think, an issue that we raised when he signed the contract in the offseason, which was it's a lot of term. It's a long term for a guy who's been playing in the league since he was a teenager. And there was legitimate concern that like the second half of the deal was going to look really bad because he has so many miles on him. I don't think any of us could have foreseen him struggling like he has to this point. I have to hope, I guess anybody has to hope, that he's just playing hurt at this point, that he's trying to gut it out, because there is no depth. There's no organizational depth at center. He probably, if he is hurt, has done the calculus of, well, me at 60% is still better than Connor Bunneman. Like, this organization doesn't have a lot of different ways to go. Giroux cannot play center for an extended period of time at the NHL level at this point. He will wear down, and what has been your most effective player will see a massive reduction in his quality and in his performance if you had to put him back up as the top line center on this team. I am convinced of that. I don't want to say that this is a Chuck Fletcher problem, but like, he did give the contract. When you bank on a guy for that kind of term, knowing how much he's played in this league and how long he's played in this league, I'm not going to say it was a poor decision, because we said at the time that if it works out, it is a great contract to have a Selke winner on. But man, that combined with Provorov regressing to the worst form I think we've seen him play since 18, 19, like it's bad. This is really bad. This is pre-Niskanen days bad. And if Ellis is the guy that has to unlock the potential in Provorov, this is where we come back to a concern. And if you remember last year when the Line A rumors were out there, I said I would consider trading Ivan Provorov because I wasn't convinced that he's going to be this top guy if you don't have somebody reliable next to him. Well, that's kind of played out. So I guess let's go a little bit big picture here, Bunny, because you're the one who brought up the 5-year rebuild. That was your poll. Does the team have to go that way? Like if we take Ant's rosy and sunny outlook that this team could theoretically turn things around, like, is it even worth it? Like, is there ceiling with this group, or even with a couple of tweaks this year? Is that potential like 8 to 11 seed team worth the effort and worth the effort again next year? Or is this organization better off tearing it down, selling off parts like Provorov, perhaps like Couturier, like Giroux, to try to get some kind of draft capital back or young players back with other potential upside? Is that the better way to go for this team for the next 3 to 5 years? Or do they keep trying to do this retool on the fly that they've done for the better part of a decade now? Like, where do you land?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one. First of all, they should have done this quite a while ago from where I am. I've seen it. Like, guys, I broadcasted radio and TV right up till 2 years ago. So I've seen the whole thing. I've watched it happen. I've watched the coaches come in, the different GMs. And I know what I saw every night. I was ringside. I watched this team every single night for 4 years, not that long ago. I was a hockey guy, but I think to myself, I'm like, God, they need changes here. Like, this is just not long haul type of stuff. So to what you're saying, Russ, you can do it in a way where you don't have to tank like every single person. I think what the Rangers did was I'm going back to the Rangers, but what they did was a good play. They told their fans too, right? They said, listen, be patient with us. We're going to try to turn this around. And now listen, are they going to win the Stanley Cup this year? Probably not. But they're in a much, much better position moving forward for the next decade than the Flyers are at all. They have a first pick and a second pick. They have Matthew Fox and they have Shesterkin. I'm going back to them. They are so far ahead of the Flyers right now based on their youthful, the youth that they have. The Flyers can't make that up except good drafting, having a lot of luck happen. So from a standpoint of a rebuild, yes, I don't want to play around anymore with, we got in, we're the 7th seed by 1 point or whatever, and we're going to get our doors blown off in the first round again. But hey, we made the playoffs and we're really hoping we could take this to another level next year. I heard the same crap year and year and year again. And I go back and it was the same thing every year. So what do you do now? Now is a real opportunity to actually say, you know what, we are going to move on from our top end core guys, get what you can get back within reason, hopefully get something good. There's some good players that would be a fit for other teams, but to go about just, like I said, the retooling and reloading and retooling, that doesn't work for me at this point. They've done that for a decade now, almost. Certainly the last 5 years, it's not worked. Now it's time to break this thing down. You've got a young goalie that you've told everybody is going to be the future of this franchise. Let him go. Don't let him build his whole starting of his career under wins and losses, having the pressure saying, you need to win this game tonight, or, that's probably what he's thinking. So break it down, build it back up, and let it go for 3 or 4 years and see where you're at. But you have to have the personnel, like Anthony said. You have to know what you're doing, what players you're getting, what's of most importance to your team. What's the sexy thing in modern hockey today? It's puck possession. It's skill down in the zone. There's still room for a lot of different players because there's a lot of jobs available. But guys, I don't know, man. I've been willing to stick it out like a lot of people have. I did say several times on my own over the years, it's just time to blow this up. And now I'll say it, there's never been a better time to reset the clock on this one and to try to move it forward, break it down to build it back up because it's not working.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, I'm okay with moving on from players that have been here that are under contract, that if you can get someone to take those contracts as part of how you're going to reshape the team, I'm fine with that.
Like, who comes to mind?
I just
like who are like the guys that are in that ilk,
Well, I mean,
to clarify.
I'm not ready to move Couturier, although he would definitely get you a return. But I mean, let's say, who could get you a return? Well, obviously we're going to start talking about trading Giroux, assuming he agrees to, the no move clause, he gets you some return this year. Okay. Travis Konechny. That's a contract that you can move, that someone will probably take, and maybe sooner rather than later you would want to move it, because if he continues to be a non-entity on the ice, then it becomes an albatross contract, right? Provorov. In all honesty, if you really want to look at it, Sanheim, if you really want to look at it. So like these players, not to say you got to move them all, but if you move a couple of them and get some value in return and create some cap flexibility, then you can say, okay, now we're going to get some extra draft picks. We maybe got a player or two that we like, that we think we could plug into this roster. We have some cap flexibility, and you go back at it next year and you try and get there again. I think you could do that without saying we're blowing the team up completely, trading everybody, getting rid of everyone, and starting from scratch. I think that path, teams have tried it and they're still there. And that's, I think it's really hard to do in hockey, because Bunny, and this is the one thing that Russ and I were arguing about yesterday on just a general phone call. Russ and I fight. But we were talking about this yesterday. You can win.
Wait, pause. Hold on. Because Bundy had something to say. I know where you're going. Let Bundy, what were you going to interject there?
I was just going to ask you guys, just a very generic question. Who is an untouchable on this team?
Well, that's the thing.
There's one guy.
Yeah.
There's one guy.
I brought this up I brought this up on Twitter as well. I said, give me 3 guys that you're going to build the team around. If you had to go next 3 to 5 years, who are the 3? And I struggled to come up with 3. I had 2. I said, you've done enough of building around what Carter Hart is supposed to be. So fine. You have a goalie who theoretically you want to build around. And I'd say Farabee. I would say Farabee has shown enough to this point that gives you enough hope, and he's on a decent contract. Those are the 2. And outside of that, I don't know what number 3 looks like. Is Hart the one for you, Bundy? Is that
he is? You know what, Russ? And in fairness, I love Farabee. He's a good young player. Is he replaceable? It's hard to replace goals. But he's a winger. Even John Leclerc would say a winger is like you can grow a good winger a dime a dozen. I don't necessarily believe that, but I did not think of him in that logic. So I will actually say, yeah, I like what his number is next year in terms of his term and contract, and he's got some real upside. He's a good young goal scorer. So I'll throw him in there as well.
Well, here's the thing too, buddy. I already said this. I can't just throw Couturier out there yet. Just because he's looked bad for 20 games, he has too much cachet as a player to me to sit there and say, let's move on from Sean Couturier at this point. I think that you still need that kind of player.
I didn't say to move on from him. I asked who an untouchable was.
Well,
that's fair. Although
I could make the argument though. Just humor me. If you're looking at a 3 to 5 year plan, right, to try to build this thing back up, would you then not in 3 to 5 years be in the exact same position with Sean Couturier that you currently are with Claude Giroux? The timelines don't work out. You're not going to be entering a 5-year prime stretch of Sean Couturier. You're going to be entering what probably is the downside of that contract, which will be he'll be mid 30s after playing in the league. It'll be 14, 15, 16 years in the league. My bigger concern, because I think Couturier is a guy that you could theoretically have as the guy for this team to lead them through what could be a painful rebuild, because he demonstrates on and off the ice what you want out of that kind of player. But I do worry because in 3 to 5 years, he's not going to be that guy. He can't be.
Yeah. It's possible. Is there a concern that he won't have the body to play the game anymore because of how much mileage he has? Sure. But you can sit there and say, look at Patrice Bergeron, who's 37, 38, plays similar game, has been in the league just almost as long. I think he came in at 19 and not 18, right? So, you look at a player like that and say, well, if he could do it, right, why can't Couturier do it? So, and Bergeron is still an effective player on a good team at that age at this point.
Bergeron's also had
I mean,
a lot
yes.
more help though. Like he hasn't been relied upon in the same
Of
way
course.
over the extended period. Like I think that's where the talent disparity
Russ,
around.
he's a 20-minute a night forward, all situations forward. Whether does he have better players around him? Yes, but that doesn't mean that he's not playing the same. It's not like Couturier's playing a ton more minutes than Bergeron. They're playing the same amount of time in each game, and they're being asked to do the same thing. You're go out against the other team's best players and be successful.
I suggested when I said it, guys, and I just want to clarify it because I don't want to get everybody all nervous in my thinking. When I say untouchable, if somebody came to you and wowed you with a trade and they wanted Couturier and you're like, holy geez, these are two great players and a draft pick, I'm game for that. Yeah. I also did suggest that Couturier should possibly be the captain of this team moving forward as well.
Right.
So he is a key piece here. But I'm just saying, if someone wows you for all the reasons we just talked about, aging, is he an aging hockey player? We don't know that yet. He may get up in 10 games, guys, and be like, wow, Coots looks awesome. So I have what I say about him now has nothing to do with this stretch of games that he's in because it falls on the whole team. I'm just saying, if someone blew you away with an offer and the terms met, I would certainly consider it. Where Carter Hart, you're going to have to offer me the world right now. For me to give up on that young goalie because I've seen him play really, really well.
And why? And this gets to the argument that Russ and I had yesterday. And why is that? Why do you need to offer the world for Carter Hart?
Because we've been told, number one, we've been told how good he is. We've seen in spurts how good he is. We've also seen how sideways he can go as a player.
Yeah.
I just think, guys, with his pedigree, the 3 years that he's had since he started, he had a great start. Went through the COVID year. There's been a lot of stuff with that illness too that's kind of messed guys' heads up. I'm just willing to really just lay it on Carter Hart for at least another 2 years and say, go for it, kid.
Is it because the position is so valuable?
It is. And I think when you look at the Rangers, right? Like look at Shesterkin, they got a guy that's going to probably, hopefully he stays healthy. He's hurt now. Is going to be the future of their team. And I think that's exactly the same hope I have for Carter Hart with the Flyers, that he continues the positive parts of his development, erases some of those maybe mental things that we see in games sometimes where it spirals on him. But I just think the goaltender is such a valuable piece of what you're trying to do. Look at Vasilevsky and Tampa. I mean, these guys are big time goaltenders, right? And they were able to take their team to 2 Stanley Cups, a guy like that. So that's why I say it. They don't grow on trees, great goalies. And I'm not willing to say Carter's a great goalie right now, but I think he's shown the ability, guys, that he can be. And I hope that he gets there. I hope he gets there.
And this is the argument that Russ and I were having. And I was sitting there saying, you don't need to have a team that has elite talent, like superstar forwards, top centers, Connor McDavid types, to be a winning team. If you have a really good goalie and you play really good defense in front of his goalie, you can get by with a forward group that does not have a superstar. Right? I mean, and that's what I'm trying to say. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think there are enough players here when you really look at what the Flyers have currently on the roster. There are enough players that that they could work if the goaltending is good and your defense is a lot better. Not to say that they all have to work together. You could move 1 or 2 of them, but you could keep 8 of these forwards and still have a successful franchise, right? I mean, that's what I'm trying to get. That's what the point. That's why I don't think it needs to be blown up. I think you can look at it and say, okay, this didn't work. We move Konechny. We move if somehow we can get somebody to take that freaking JVR contract for whatever reason, right? And maybe you move 1 other player, maybe whatever. And then you concentrate on really solidifying that blue line and maybe add 1 or 2 pieces in the offseason for up front. I think you got a team again that could be competitive. You don't need – it's nice to have an Ovechkin. It's nice to have a Crosby. It's nice to have a Malkin or a McDavid or Draisaitl. Yeah, sure. It's nice to have those players. They don't grow on trees. You have to get the number 1 pick in the draft or number 2 pick in the draft in a good draft to get those types of players.
And can you do that
So
by
far
retooling?
be it from having
do you get
that-
a number 1 overall pick by retooling and by plugging and playing? It's a simple question.
Probably
A
not.
simple answer. Okay.
Probably not.
Okay. And
But-
therein lies the crux of the argument.
But
I
there's
think.
no guarantee that you're going to get it if you
There's not.
tank.
And
So
there's
that's what
no
I'm saying.
guarantee that it's a generational player. See Nico Hischier. See Nolan Patrick at number 2. It's not a guarantee.
This is my point.
But
This is not the
but-
NBA. You think like the NBA, and this is not the NBA.
but
This is
that's
not.
what
It's
this
not a
is.
star-driven league. It's not.
See,
You
and
don't
that's,
need.
That's not true. That's just not. It's fundamentally not true. Here's the issue that I have. My point has
you're so
never
wrong.
been.
You're
My
so wrong.
point, just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean there isn't validity in what I have to say. Like you need to
Every generational superstar outside of McDavid, I guess, and Eric too, have won a Stanley Cup. If you go back to even 50 years, 60 years, the generational star that's come in, Anthony, I don't know where that ended, but the only one I'd ever had was up till Eric Lindros was the only one that had never won. If you go back, Lafleur, Crosby, even Ovechkin, I mean, in terms of his goal
Ovechkin
scoring, certainly going to be
eventually
the
got
greatest
one.
of all time. Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Jean Beliveau going back to the 50s. These guys were prodigies. They delivered. That's all they did was deliver.
Right, but it was also we're also talking, Bundy, in an era when there were 18, 20 teams. Now there's 32. That's why it's harder for McDavid to win a cup now than it was when it was for Guy Lafleur.
But Crosby and Ovechkin did it, and they did it as
They
leaders
did.
on their team. As
They did.
best players,
and
on
that's where
did.
I think the crux of the argument is different. Like, Ant, you were very much of the mindset that if you make the playoffs, you have a shot to go far. See
Yes.
Montreal last year.
Yeah.
But look what Montreal did. It was a fluky run, and now they're blowing it up. They admitted publicly they're blowing it up because that 1-year run wasn't enough to justify retooling.
Yes, because they also knew that the way that it was set up last year with all the Canadian teams in one division, like
Yes,
they probably
run.
don't make that run if it was the
okay,
normal
but they
divisions.
got that Stanley Cup run, and it wasn't enough for them to say we're just a few pieces away, or we're going to retool. They hit the button on it. St. Louis is like the one that you like to go back to, and that's fine. But that is an anomaly. St. Louis turning around the worst team, Berube leading that team to a Stanley Cup, is an anomaly. The reason it stands out is because it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen consistently.
There's one team, Russ. There's one team that I can go to in the last decade that I think did it with a retool and a reload. Did it more than once, actually. But they, at the end of the day, when you look at this team over time, they had a Norris Trophy winning defenseman. They had certainly a future Hall of Fame goalie with a mixed bag offensively of guys that all stepped up together. Who am I talking about?
LA.
The LA
Yeah, I was gonna
Kings.
say the Kings.
The LA
Yeah,
Kings did it. They picked up some really good players in Carter and Richards at the time. And they had Kopitar, Dustin Brown. Those guys played hard. That was an example of a kind of a team that can win. Had an outstanding goaltender. They had a big, solid defense with a guy like Jake Muzzin there. He picked up some size, and then you had Doughty, with power play. So, and they actually won it with a very miserable power play one year. But that's the kind of team.
They were an 8 seed the year they won. The first time they won.
That they were the 8 seed. They beat Vancouver.
Yeah,
from the year who went to the final. So that's a kind of, to me, Anthony and Russ, that's the kind of team that's like a team that had the right characters, right personnel, and they ended up being rewarded with a great goaltender. Very, very good goalie.
And my problem is I want to see this team build a team that is a year in and year out contender. I don't want just the one lucky playoff run. And like you go back to the Sixers thing all the time. Are they in any better shape? Yeah. I mean, we can argue about like what the Evan Turner Sixers were and Andre Iguodala Sixers are, and like the fact that they made a deeper playoff run. But does anybody think that on any given day that team could beat a Joel Embiid led Sixers team? No, it would be silly. My problem is get me a team that has a legitimate chance for 3 to 5 years to be a top 2 or 3 team in the conference and have a legitimate shot at the Stanley Cup. And I don't think that this team is 1 or 2 pieces away from being that. And so if that's the case, I look at it and I say, we need to figure out a way to get top end talent. The Rangers are lucky because they're in New York. They were able to attract Panarin to come because there is a special element to New York City and to the New York market. We see it across every sport, with the exception of the Knicks. But like we see it across sports, it's just how it works. If you're not a free agent destination, which I don't think the Flyers are, we've talked about it enough, then where does that top end talent come? It either has to happen via trade, which is, I mean, we're talking about trading off pieces with the hope of acquiring young players back or draft capital, or it's through the draft. And the only way to get those super high picks that have maybe a better shot of hitting than like number 17, number 18, number 22 is to have a bad season or two and hope that whichever guy you get in the top 3 ends up being one of those generational talents. I mean, Tampa, Pittsburgh, Chicago, LA, like those teams had sustained runs of excellence. And as Bundy pointed out, for practically every one of those teams, they had at least one star A-level talent player. This team right now does not have a guy who is the best player on any team he goes to in this league. And I think you could argue
Bundy's got to run, and Bundy's got to run. But I'm gonna take you to school after he leaves.
Nice, great
So let's
show
say
as
goodbye to
always.
Bundy.
Bye, Bundy.
And
See you guys. Love you both.
Yeah.
Take it easy on each other. I'll be watching.
yeah, you got it. No problem. All right, now let me explain something to you. You just identified those teams. Pittsburgh. Yes, they had an elite. They had more than one elite player. You had Crosby, Malkin, Fleury were 3 guys that were taken at the very top of the draft. But how bad was Pittsburgh for how long before they got to those 3 players? And then they had to be fortunate enough to win those lotteries in those years that those players were available. It was a perfect storm for them, but they were bad for a decade.
Mhm.
They were bad, not mediocre, getting into the playoffs and have a shot. They were bad for a decade to get that. Chicago got lucky and vaulted the Flyers to get Patrick Kane. If they don't vault the Flyers to get Patrick Kane, Chicago doesn't win 3 Stanley Cups. Okay? So they got lucky in that regard. And how bad were they? They were bad for decades, plural decades.
Sure.
Okay? So that's how bad they were for how long. The Kings, they didn't have the superstar player. They built, like Bundy said, that's the kind of team that you look at what the Flyers have now and say, this team can get closer to LA than they can to Chicago, Pittsburgh, Tampa, like that ilk, because they have Carter Hart, who could become that goalie. They don't quite have the Doughty defenseman. They had thought that they might have.
They don't even remotely have that.
They thought that they might have in Provorov, but they don't.
Yeah.
But the forward group is similar. Kopitar and Couturier are similar players, very similar players.
Yeah.
And I would even argue that Giroux currently, not to say that he's going to be part of the future here, but Giroux currently is better than any other forward that the Kings had on that team, on those teams that won the Stanley Cup. So to sit there and say that you're not that far away, or they're not 1 or 2 pieces away, well, they don't have the Norris Trophy defenseman. But with the exception of that, they're closer than you think to LA than they are to, Pittsburgh.
I don't think they're close to any of these. I think Bundy was pointing out that that's the exemplar model, that if that's the way that you're going to go by trying to plug and play, yes. But like part of what vaulted the Kings was the acquisition and the acquisitions of Richards and Carter. That gave them what really was, in a lot of ways, projected to be 2 of the Flyers' top 3 forwards. As one was on the first line, one was on the second line. Like that was an excess of riches, I guess would be my point.
Well, they
don't have that right now. Like they tried.
No, they were second and third line in LA. They didn't. What the Kings recognized that they didn't have is they didn't have quality down the middle. Behind Kopitar, they didn't have another center. And so acquiring Richards was initially going to be their number 2 center. And then they realized after that trade that, Richards was already starting to have a little bit of a decline. He was still a good player, but already starting to have a little bit of a decline, and that they would be better suited come the playoffs with Richards playing on the third line if they could get a scorer to play on the second line. And then they went out and traded for Carter from Columbus to make that happen. So that's how they made that work. But they had in place, they had a 2-way center at number 1 in Kopitar, which the Flyers have. They had in place the equivalent of a third line center in Richards in that trade, which is Kevin Hayes. I mean,
Question mark, but not healthy right now, or
No,
doesn't
okay,
look
but-
quite like the same guy. But okay, sure.
But okay, like I think so. What I'm saying. So
Mhm.
as you could, if you want to sit there and say, okay, the difference right now between what LA and yes, they had a bunch of guys who bought in that were grinder type forwards. You know, the Dustin Brown will go through a wall for you, kind of a leader as a third line forward. Toffoli was a young kid on those championship teams, and they had a bunch of guys like that who kind of all bought in. And I think you look at this Flyers team, you can sit there and say, okay, can you see a Cam Atkinson being one of those kind of buy-in kind of guys in the playoffs? Sure, I can. I certainly can. Can you see, further down the lineup, a Scott Lawton being one of those kind of guys? Yeah, I could certainly see that. So I think that there are, again, players here who could fit that mold. They don't have it all, but they're not as far away as you think. I think the blue line is where it's missing. You don't have a Doughty at all. You don't have a Muzzin. I mean, I could argue that maybe Ellis could be something.
Muzzin.
No, Muzzin's more big. He's a bigger player. I'd say that maybe. I mean, Ellis.
I'm
Ellis
just saying, like, impact on the game.
Yeah, Ellis could have
because
he's not
right a 1-1.
Right. He could have a little bit more impact, and maybe that makes Provorov better. And Ristolainen. Look, I think Ristolainen's played great. I really do.
Look good.
I would.
He's not signed. He's not signed.
I would re-sign.
They might lose him. He might be.
Listen,
he might be the biggest revelation of the season, and he might not re-sign. So
yeah,
that's
so that's why I'm
great.
saying, like, could you move on from a Sanheim here and improve the defense? Yeah, like I think you can. And that's the thing. And so that, to me, I just don't see it. I just don't see breaking down this entire roster and then being bad for so long and hoping against hope that you hit those lottery spots. It's too much of it. I think in the NHL, it's too much of a gamble. I really do. I think you can get away with it in the NBA more than you can in hockey. And you just see teams who've tried and have failed miserably. I think you have a better chance of being a non-superstar team and winning a Stanley Cup than you do in any other sport.
I think that for this to play out the way that you want it to play out, a lot of things have to break differently, and they had to break differently from the start. And we went into this offseason saying a lot of these things had to happen at the same time for this team to have a legitimate chance. They haven't broken that way. And I'm not convinced that if you just make a couple of tweaks along the edges for next year, that this team is going to come close. I mean, I don't even know what to say. Like the blue line with this team, if Ellis stays healthy, if Ristolainen keeps taking a step forward, okay, well then you have two, right? You have a first pair and probably a second pair. Hold on, because organizationally, right?
You're completely blowing off Provorov, which you shouldn't do.
Well,
he's not Drew Doughty, but he's also not Keith Yandel, right? I mean, he's a top four defenseman.
I'm looking at it from the standpoint of, like, if it's retooling, right? And like, we talked about which guys could you potentially move off of to try to get some assets back. If it's a retool or if it's a full-on rebuild, well, Provorov's probably one that can get you value. That's why I'm not really including him in that long-term prediction, because
that's fair.
You need to get
that's fine.
assets.
But then you have to assume that you're going to get an asset in return that's going to benefit. You're not just selling him off for a draft pick, right? I mean, you're going to get something back that's going to bring. You're probably going to get a top four defenseman back, or if not, you're going to get a top end forward back in return.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you go back, Russ, and let's wrap it with this, because we still have to do a couple 5 stars. If you can go back to the beginning of last season, would you do the Provorov for Line A deal now?
Yeah.
Would you?
I said at the time that I would have pulled the trigger on it. I would have thought about it strong.
I'm still not sure.
Here's why, though. Here's why. Because Line A is only 23. And I know that he's not, like, going off. He hasn't been crazy successful with the team he's with, right? Can you blame him? And he's also back home in Finland. He just lost his dad. So it's possible that this whole year he's just not going to mentally be with it. So, like, even if we get to the end of the season and he only scores 10 goals, like, how do you blame the guy, right? I looked at with Line, you knew that was his second year in the league. He scored 44 goals. So he showed you the possibility of being that game-changing kind of goal scorer that this team just doesn't have and has not had. And that was my argument, was we saw his ability to do that. And my fear, even last year, was if you don't have a guy next to Provorov to elevate his game, there's a chance that it could fall apart. And it happened when Niskanen went away, and it's happened again since Ellis has been hurt. And to me, it kind of reaffirms my belief that like that is a move that probably would have behooved your organization had you made it last year. It doesn't mean that it would have worked out, but I would always rather go for the high upside there in a skill that is so difficult to find. You admitted it, Bundy admitted it. It's so hard to find goal scoring in this league. That versus what Provorov is on his own when he doesn't have that guy next to him holding his hand. I don't know how you go against that. I know it's an upside thing. I know it's not a guarantee, but I like the upside versus, unfortunately, what we've seen play out.
But knowing what we know now, and knowing how Line played in Columbus last year, and how he's not gotten off to a good start this year. And like you mentioned, now is, he lost his dad and he's back home in Finland. But I still think that what Provorov gives you on a night in, night out basis is more valuable than what Line has shown in the last 2 years. I'm not convinced Patrick Line gets back to being that 40 goal scorer. So I like the concerns you have on Provorov are the concerns I have on Line. And so therefore, if I had to choose between an uncertainty of where my top pair defenseman fits, is he more of a second pair guy than he is a top pair guy, or my top scoring winger, maybe not being a scoring winger at all, I'd rather have the defenseman because I think he brings more value.
The upside that you would have had, though, correct me if I'm wrong, is Line is a free agent at the end of the season. So if you had made that move and it doesn't work out, or you don't believe in it, either you're potentially able to buy him on the cheap-ish in free agency, or you could just cut the cord altogether, and then that's one less contract that you have. It gives maybe a little bit of flexibility.
We got to remember at the time Provorov wasn't signed either, right? So
yeah, it was kind of a foregone conclusion.
What I was about to say is if you made that deal, you probably were going to sign Line. You probably would have given him a contract,
or you would have ended up in the same situation Columbus is, which is he's probably going to walk.
Yeah,
right. I don't know if he's an RFA or he's a free agent or a UFA. I don't remember.
I think he's probably an RFA.
If he's an RFA, well, then
he's probably
have the right to match or to trade his rights. So
he's too young to be an UFA.
Got years in. Okay. All right. I guess that's probably a good spot to stop today. I'm sure that we'll go to war over things again at some point in the future, but we just have very conflicting views on how we view what needs to happen for this team. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Certainly would like to hear from all of the listeners out there, Facebook, Twitter. You can send us an email, snowthegoalie@gmail.com. Let us know, I don't know, what you agree with, what you disagree with. Let us know. We do have 5-star reviews, the things that give Anthony lifeblood in this world. 5-star reviews. We got 2. First one comes from Ballpark Franks 7. Flyers talk without the spin, 5 stars. These guys speak openly about the team and organization on and off the ice without sugarcoating or spinning things to fit an agenda. Brutal honesty when needed and a realistic perspective of the product we see on ice for good and bad. Newer listener, but won't be missing this one going forward. Exactly what the fans deserve out of a Flyers podcast. 10 out of 10.
Awesome.
When 5 stars aren't enough, you double it yourself in the comments. And then
that was a good review.
And then Hostage Joe checks in.
Now, Hostage Joe.
I want to be very clear that we are not holding Joe hostage. We are not.
Hostage Joe.
What are the odds that this is is this a Joe Biden joke that we don't know about? Is this like the whole Basement Joe thing? Or is this just some guy named Joe who wants people to think he's a hostage? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. But Hostage Joe, let's get into it. 5 stars. The only Flyers podcast is top notch. I mean, we could stop there. That's great.
That's it.
Snow the Goalie is a terrific podcast. The only Flyers podcast and my favorite sports podcast, period. Do we keep going, Ant? Like, this is amazing. Russ has an innate knack for hosting, entertaining, provoking, sly wit, the right cadence. Perhaps honed through years of devotion to professional wrestling, Russ knows how to play to his strengths as a weasel. Thank you. Love that.
I think you wrote this.
I didn't. Anthony, I read this and I was like, the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to be accused of writing it. Anthony is knowledgeable without being boring, delivers usually level-headed insight with occasional inside info. And he and Russ have the chemistry of an old married couple. Bickery, but the relationship works in its familiarity and you can still sense the love. I've long been a fan of an unmuzzled Chris Tarian, and his no-holds-barred approach has made an already entertaining and insightful podcast even better. Keep up the good work, guys. Hostage Joe.
Thanks, Hostage Joe.
Listen, if Hostage Joe's going to keep writing like that, we might just have to keep him in captivity. I mean, sorry, we don't have Hostage Joe. We don't have him in our captivity that we know about. Although Bundy had to leave partway through the episode. Was he checking on Hostage Joe? Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think Bundy was checking on Hostage Joe. We usually leave him down there for a few weeks. No, I'm just kidding. That's horrible. Shouldn't say things like that. Anyway, thank you to Hostage Joe and to Ballpark Franks 7 for the 5-star reviews. Of course, you can be just like Hostage Joe and Ballpark Franks 7. Go over to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. The ratings are great. We love 5-star ratings, but 5-star reviews, we'll read them on the show. Remember, you can be critical. You can be complimentary. Either way, we'll read it as long as it's 5 stars. You go 4, 3, 2, or 1. Nay, we don't read it, but 5 stars, we do. And anything else you want to tell the people before we sign up? By the way, I have not listened to this. I have no idea if it's any good, but I need to draw attention to it. Pablo Torre just tweeted a podcast, an ESPN Daily podcast. The Arizona Cardinals and the NFL want you to forget how they stole a title in 1925 from Little Pottsville, Pennsylvania. That's right. That's right. David Fleming tells the insane story of why they got hit with the oldest, strongest championship curse in sports. That's right. The Pottsville Maroons, ladies and gentlemen, look them up. 1925 NFL champions were stripped of the title. A bunch of shenanigans went down. And until that title is restored to the Pottsville Maroons, you can bet against the Cardinals. Bet against them from now until the end of time. They cannot break that curse. This is not some stupid Chicago Cubs curse. No, this one cannot be broken. You owe it to that little fantastic city in Schuylkill County, up there in the coal country. Give the championship back. As spoken by a true Pottsville native. And are you aware of the 1925 NFL championship scandal?
Yes, I am well aware of it. And I used to like the Pottsville Maroons. I used to like that story and felt bad for the Pottsville Maroons. Mm-hmm. Now I listen to you complain about it, and it's like, screw them.
Wow.
Screw those guys.
Wow. That's just hurtful. Just terrible. Terrible. Awful of you. Just horrendous. Listen, someday they'll restore the title. I don't know when. It probably won't ever happen. But in the meantime, I'm going to root for it. I'm going to cross my fingers. We'll all say a prayer. Anyway, thanks for listening to Snow the Goalie. Make sure you follow us over on Twitter at AnSanPhilly, at CTarian6, at Joy on Broad. You can, of course, follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Snow the Goalie, Facebook.com/Snow the Goalie. You can watch just about every episode of the Bundy era and since the Bundy era started over on Crossing Broad's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Crossing Broad. There's a playlist with all the episodes. This one will not be available in video edition as we had to do 2 separate recordings, splice them together. Bundy froze. Anthony yelled at me at the end of our first recording when we had to hit the pause because Zoom Premium is not something I possess. So a lot of editing that has to go in. And if I tried to give this to video guy Craig and say, make sure you make these splices at this times, he might show up to my house and end me. So no video this week, video back again next week. So for Ant, find him on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. For Bundy, at CTarian6. I'm Russ at Joy on Broad. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back again next week. Unless, who knows? Maybe the Flyers will make another firing. Probably not. Maybe a big trade. Who knows? Probably not. We don't know. But if they do, we'll be back. If not, we'll talk to you in a week. Thanks for listening.